Officer Bradley Kerrigan's hand slammed across Malcolm Price's face, the crack of skin on skin echoing through the quiet streets of Willow Creek. As Malcolm staggered to the ground, stunned but silent, a dozen cell phones captured the moment that would shatter the town's fragile peace. And in that split second, before anyone realized who he truly was, Willow Creek's darkest truth was laid bare for the world to see. It was close to midnight in Willow Creek, California, a town small enough that most nights you could hear a screen door slam 3 blocks away. Nothing much ever happened here, at least, nothing that made it beyond the county paper. But that night, something did. Officer Bradley Kerrigan, behind the wheel of Patrol Unit 14, shifted restlessly in his seat, his uniform sticking to his back from the lingering summer heat. It had been a bad day, the kind that left you itching for someone else to blame. His supervisor had denied his vacation request, his girlfriend had ghosted him again, and earlier, a car repair bill had wiped out half his savings. Now all he wanted was for this shift to end, but the hours dragged like wet cement. That's when he saw it. An old blue Honda Accord, creeping a little under the speed limit, turned off Langford Avenue onto Briarwood Street. Perfectly legal. No erratic moves. No broken taillight. But something about it annoyed him. Maybe it was the car's beat-up look. Maybe it was the time of night. Maybe it was the glimpse of the driver's dark skin illuminated by the streetlight. He didn't think about it too hard. He flicked on his lights. The Honda pulled over immediately, no stalling, no sudden movements, just quiet compliance. Kerrigan stepped out of his cruiser, adjusted his belt, and strode toward the car, boots hitting the asphalt in sharp, deliberate steps. He didn't call it in. Didn't bother running the plates. He just knew he wanted a closer look. The driver had already rolled down his window. License and registration, Kerrigan barked, hand resting heavy on his holster. The man inside, black, maybe early 40s, clean-shaven, wearing a simple gray blazer over a t-shirt, moved slowly, deliberately, reaching toward the glove box. "It's in here," he said, voice calm, deliberate. "Just letting you know before I move." Kerrigan's jaw tightened. He didn't like that tone. Too steady. Too respectful. Not scared enough. And that irritated him more than he cared to admit. "Did I do something wrong, officer?" the man asked, meeting Kerrigan's eyes directly but without any challenge. Kerrigan took a step back. "Don't question me." "You don't get to ask questions," he snapped. The man paused, then handed over his ID and insurance card. Kerrigan didn't even glance at the name. He was already irritated, the patience, the calm, the way the man sat there like he belonged on this street, at this hour. People were supposed to be nervous during a stop. Not this guy. "Get out of the car," Kerrigan barked. The man blinked, surprised. "Sir, may I ask why?" "I said get out of the damn car." Kerrigan's voice ricocheted off the quiet houses. A porch light flickered on down the street. Another window curtain twitched. The man stepped out slowly, hands in plain view, movements careful. "I don't want any trouble," he said. Kerrigan didn't answer. He moved in fast, chest puffed out, and shoved the man, lightly at first, a test, then harder. The man stumbled back, but caught his balance. "You gonna resist now?" Kerrigan growled. "No, sir. I'm not resisting." Arms raised, voice steady, no aggression. But that didn't matter. The anger boiling under Kerrigan's skin had found a target. His open palm swung hard across the man's face, an ugly, cracking slap that sent him sprawling to the pavement. Across the street, a teenage girl gasped. Her phone, already recording, caught the sickening thud of skin against concrete. The man didn't fight back. Didn't yell. Just looked up, dazed but clear-eyed, breathing slow. Another cruiser screeched up behind Kerrigan's, lights flashing. Officer Damon Reeves jumped out, jogging toward the scene, and froze. "Brad! Brad, stop!" he shouted, voice sharp with alarm. "Do you even know who that is?" Kerrigan didn't listen. He grabbed the man by the collar, hauling him halfway off the ground. That's when the man spoke, voice low but cutting through the heavy night air. "My name is Malcolm Price," he said. "I'm the mayor of Willow Creek." Time stopped. Reeves stopped cold. Kerrigan blinked, still gripping the fabric of the man's blazer, still breathing hard. He looked down, finally seeing the ID he'd been holding in his other hand, the name staring back at him like a punch to the gut. Malcolm Price. Mayor. Kerrigan's stomach dropped through the soles of his boots. But it was too late. Cameras were rolling. Faces had appeared behind curtains and porch railings. Across the street, Shelby Ortiz's livestream had already hit over 2,000 viewers. Another neighbor was dialing the local news station. "That's the mayor," someone shouted. "Yo, he just hit the mayor." Kerrigan stumbled back, blinking like he'd been pulled out of a dream. I didn't know," he stammered. His voice cracked in the humid air, but nobody cared. Not now. Mayor Price stood up on his own, wiping blood from the corner of his mouth. His cheek was already swelling, but he didn't raise his voice. Didn't yell. He just looked at Kerrigan, steady and sad. "You never even asked for my name," he said. Kerrigan opened his mouth, but no words came out. Reeves stepped between them. "Kerrigan, go wait in your car. Now." "I didn't know." Kerrigan repeated, louder, desperate, as if that could undo the blow, the damage, the humiliation. "Now," Reeves said, voice firm. Slowly, painfully, Kerrigan turned and walked back to his cruiser, every eye in the neighborhood burning into his back. The tension didn't lift, it thickened, hanging over the street like smoke before a fire. Reeves turned to Mayor Price. "Sir, are you all right?" "I'll need medical," Price said, voice low but unshaken. "And I want everything recorded. Body cams. Witnesses. All of it." "Yes, sir," Reeves said immediately, already waving over Officer Sanchez, who had just arrived. They began collecting names, statements, phone numbers, locking down every shred of evidence they could. A woman from across the street clutched her chest, repeating, "They hit the mayor, they hit the mayor," like a prayer or a curse. Malcolm Price sat down on the curb, not from weakness, but from calculation. His legs weren't steady, and he refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing him fall again. An EMT arrived 10 minutes later. They cleaned the blood, checked his jaw, recommended x-rays. He agreed, but not before demanding copies of every file, every clip, every body cam recording made that night. By 12:46 a.m., Mayor Malcolm Price sat in the back of an ambulance, wrapped in flashing red lights and the low murmur of disbelief spreading through Willow Creek like electricity. Officer Kerrigan sat in his cruiser, drenched in sweat, frozen in place. He hadn't even radioed it in. Reeves had done it for him. Kerrigan's mind buzzed with panic, guilt, and something else he didn't want to name. Deep down, he knew the truth. It wasn't about not recognizing the mayor. It was about what he had assumed the second he saw that dark skin behind the wheel. And there were no words that could fix that. Back at the station, Chief Helena Moore was pulled from sleep by a call she couldn't ignore. "Mayor assaulted by Willow Creek officer. It's on Twitter. It's everywhere." Her stomach dropped. She didn't ask who. She already knew. By sunrise, Willow Creek wasn't the sleepy town it had been hours earlier. News vans lined Main Street. The footage of Kerrigan slapping Mayor Price replayed on a brutal, endless loop on every local channel. Every anchor said the same thing: he didn't even ask for the mayor's name. And with each replay, Willow Creek's image cracked a little more. At 7:30 a.m., Chief Moore convened a closed-door meeting at the station. Her face was like carved stone. She had served this department for over 25 years. She had seen mistakes, some small, some fatal, but this was different. "Effective immediately," she said, her voice clipped and cold, "Officer Bradley Kerrigan is placed on administrative leave pending full investigation. His badge and firearm are already in my possession. Internal Affairs has been notified." This will not be handled quietly. Or slowly. Around the room, some officers nodded. Some didn't. In the back, Officer Reeves sat, arms crossed, hearing Malcolm Price's words over and over again. You never even asked for my name. Outside, news vans were parked in front of City Hall. Reporters hammered the mayor's office with questions. But Malcolm Price, resting at home, hadn't said a word yet. He was waiting. Watching. And when he spoke, Willow Creek would never be the same again. Malcolm Price sat silently in his living room, the muted glow of the television washing over his face, a bag of ice pressed gently to his swollen cheek. Outside, the town he had fought to serve and heal stirred with a tension so thick it seemed to rattle the windows. He didn't need the news anchors to tell him what had happened, he had lived it, but he watched anyway, studying every angle, every replay of the viral footage that now defined the name Malcolm Price in households far beyond Willow Creek. On the screen, the blow came again, captured from a dozen cell phones, the sharp crack of flesh against flesh, the stumble to the pavement. The moment he said his name and the world around Officer Bradley Kerrigan finally seemed to snap awake. Malcolm wasn't watching to feel anger. He was searching, trying to understand how a man in uniform could look at him and see not a neighbor, not a citizen, but a threat to be subdued. His father's old words echoed in his mind. It's not about who you are, son. It's about what they think when they see you. Across town, others were asking the same questions. Old frustrations, once whispered over coffee or behind closed doors, were swelling into conversations that could no longer be contained. At Baxter's Diner, the usual hum of gossip had turned sharper, the regulars replaying the video on cracked phones and asking each other what it meant that their own mayor, a man they had elected, could be treated like that on a quiet street with no witnesses but cameras. But there had been witnesses everywhere. And now the silence was breaking. By the second day, reports surfaced, old complaints against Officer Kerrigan that never made it past the supervisor's desk. 19 separate incidents over the last 10 years, each one brushed aside, minimized, or buried under a stack of paperwork. Some were small, some not so small. A mother pulled over and accused of stealing her own car. A teenager roughed up 4 talking back. None of it serious enough, they said at the time. None of it loud enough to matter. Until now. The weight of all those ignored voices seemed to hang over Willow Creek like a gathering storm. In the police department, officers huddled in hallways and whispered behind closed doors. Some defended Kerrigan, muttering about good cops getting thrown under the bus. Others, younger or newer to the force, stayed silent, eyes wary, the old loyalty to the badge warring with something harder to ignore, the truth. Chief Helena Moore sat in her office late into the night, reading every past complaint with a sinking heart. She had been part of this department for almost 30 years. She had believed in its ability to protect and serve. But as she read, she realized she had also been part of the silence that let officers like Kerrigan slip through unchecked. She thought about the night she got the call about Malcolm, the sick drop in her stomach, and she knew this wasn't just one officer's mistake. This was a reckoning long overdue. Meanwhile, Malcolm Price moved carefully, quietly. He had declined interviews, declined offers from national outlets wanting to turn him into a symbol. He didn't want to be a symbol. He wanted to be a leader. And leaders chose their moments. 3 days after the assault, as the sun rose over a town holding its breath, Malcolm stood on the front steps of City Hall, facing a sea of reporters, residents, and officers in uniform. No grand stage. No teleprompters. Just a simple podium and the faint discoloration still visible on his jaw. He gripped the sides of the podium for a moment, gathering himself, and then he began. I've stayed quiet these last few days, he said, his voice carrying over the restless murmur of the crowd, not because I was afraid. Not because I didn't know what to say. But because I needed to make sure that when I spoke, I wasn't speaking from anger. A hush fell. Even the phones paused for a beat. Malcolm looked across the crowd, at the reporters scribbling notes, at the police officers standing stiffly along the edges, at the teenagers holding homemade signs that read justice for all. "I'm not here today as a victim," he said, steady as stone. "I'm here as your mayor. Your neighbor. Your equal." Some clapped, tentatively at first. Others just stood, listening. "What happened to me isn't new. It's not rare. It's just visible." "And visibility," he said, pausing as his eyes swept the crowd, "changes everything." He laid out his demands with the same calm precision he had always brought to his work: an independent review of the police department, mandatory retraining for every officer on bias recognition and de-escalation, and full transparency with the public. "This is not about tearing down our police," he said. "It's about building them up the right way. It's about accountability, not vengeance. It's about fixing a broken system before it breaks us all." There was more clapping now, louder, fuller. A chant even started briefly from the back of the crowd: "Fix it! Fix it!" Malcolm didn't let the emotion sweep him away. He finished simply, "We cannot demand trust if we refuse to be worthy of it. Willow Creek deserves better. Starting now." Then he stepped away from the microphone and walked back inside without answering questions, without fanfare, without looking back. The town reacted like a ripple across a pond. At Baxter's Diner, hardened skeptics rewatched his speech 3-4 times, nodding quietly over coffee mugs. At the high school library, students who had organized a vigil hugged each other and posted clips of Malcolm's words to their social media feeds, captioning it with hope. In the police department, the silence turned heavier. Officers who once joked freely at roll call now avoided each other's eyes. Some handed in transfer requests. Others started asking hard questions. Officer Damon Reeves, who had witnessed the night it all unraveled, sat at his desk staring at the paperwork that seemed to double overnight. He had seen what happened. He had known it was wrong. But knowing and speaking up were two different things. Across from him, Chief Moore held a closed-door meeting with the city council, her face drawn tight. She didn't offer excuses. She didn't deflect. "We let this happen," she said simply. "Now we fix it, or we fail this town forever." The council split along expected lines. Councilwoman Dana Fields, sharp and unyielding, demanded swift action. Councilman Robert Hastings warned against demonizing the whole department for one mistake. But even he knew, deep down, that this was no longer about one mistake. Willow Creek had seen itself reflected in that footage, raw, unfiltered, and it didn't like what it saw. Protests grew but remained peaceful. Residents, young and old, black, white, and Latino, stood together outside City Hall every evening, holding candles and signs, not demanding blood but demanding change. One night, a sign held by a child no older than 10 summed it up best: "We are watching." Meanwhile, inside his home, Malcolm Price continued to move carefully, methodically. He met with legal advisors. He reviewed oversight protocols from other towns that had undergone reform. He spoke quietly with faith leaders and business owners, building a coalition that would support real, lasting change. He didn't lash out. He didn't grandstand. He listened. He planned. And as Willow Creek shifted uneasily toward an uncertain future, one thing became clear to everyone paying attention: the silence that once protected the powerful had shattered. In its place, a new sound was rising, not a roar, not yet, but a steady drumbeat of voices saying enough, enough, enough. And Malcolm Price, battered but unbowed, stood ready to lead them. The drumbeat of change that had started with whispered conversations and cautious marches was growing louder now, steady as a heartbeat that refused to slow down. Willow Creek, a town that once prided itself on being too small for trouble, was wide awake, staring at itself in the mirror for the first time in a long time. Weeks had passed since Malcolm Price had stood on the steps of City Hall and demanded more than apologies. The independent review he called for had worked around the clock, combing through every piece of evidence, every complaint, every dusty report buried in old filing cabinets. When the findings came out, they landed like a thunderclap. 19 complaints. 19 times Officer Bradley Kerrigan's name had surfaced, attached to words like excessive force, harassment, intimidation. 19 times and never once a formal hearing. Never once true accountability. The people of Willow Creek had known, deep down. The ones who had whispered warnings, the ones who had changed routes home to avoid certain streets, the ones who taught their kids how to move, how to lower their voices, how to survive. Now the whispers were written in ink, undeniable, unerasable. Chief Helena Moore stood beside Malcolm Price and Councilwoman Dana Fields at the press conference, her uniform crisp but her eyes shadowed by the weight of the truth. The City Hall chamber was packed to the walls, the tension heavy enough to touch. Malcolm stepped to the microphone first. He didn't look triumphant. He looked tired. Resolved. Effective immediately, he said, his voice even, steady, Officer Bradley Kerrigan is terminated from his position with the Willow Creek Police Department. He will not be reinstated, reassigned, or shielded under any city contract. Not now. Not ever. The room stayed frozen for a heartbeat, then erupted, some in applause, some in muttered curses, some in stunned silence. Reporters shouted questions. Malcolm raised his hand once and they fell quiet. This is not about punishment for its own sake, he said, looking directly into the cameras, into the homes of everyone watching. This is about responsibility. About deciding what kind of leadership we want behind a badge, and making the decision loud enough that no one can mistake it. Then he stepped back and let Chief Moore speak. She didn't sugarcoat it. She didn't hide behind technicalities. We failed, she said bluntly, her voice rough with emotion. I failed. Not just the mayor. Not just the victims whose stories stayed locked in drawers. We failed this entire town. And for that, I will cooperate fully with every oversight reform this city demands. Some murmured. Some nodded grimly. No one interrupted. Outside, the news spread like a fresh fire across Willow Creek. Some residents cheered. Others raged. A handful grumbled about scapegoating. But most understood, even if they couldn't say it out loud, the town had crossed a line it could never uncross. The days that followed weren't marked by riots or violence. They were marked by something deeper, quieter, harder to spot unless you were really paying attention. People lingered longer at crosswalks, making eye contact with officers who used to be invisible. Conversations in grocery stores stretched a little longer, dipped a little deeper. Parents talked to their children about fairness, about power, about what it meant to stand up when standing up was hard. And inside the police department, the old walls of silence and blind loyalty began to crack. A civilian oversight board was established, its members selected from across the community, teachers, business owners, pastors, retirees. Their mandate was simple: review every complaint, every incident, every report that crossed their desks, and make sure the department remembered who it served. An anonymous reporting hotline went live. It didn't take long for the first calls to come in. Not all serious. Some confused. Some old grudges rehashed. But among them were real concerns, concerns that now had a place to be heard, a place to matter. Regular meetings between officers and residents were launched. The first few were tense, awkward, filled with long silences and shorter tempers. But they happened. And each one stretched a little longer than the last, each one chipped a little more off the wall that had divided badge from citizen. Through it all, Malcolm Price was there. Not behind a podium. Not behind a desk. In the neighborhoods. In the parks. On the porches where real change would have to start. He didn't make speeches. He listened. When someone shouted, he let them finish. When someone cried, he waited. When someone accused him of not doing enough, he nodded and said, "Tell me what more you need." He knew that real leadership wasn't about winning arguments. It was about standing in the uncomfortable spaces long enough to build bridges. And it was working. Slowly. Painfully. But it was working. One Saturday afternoon, at a town hall meeting in the Ridgeway Elementary gym, a young boy raised his hand during open comments. He couldn't have been older than 9. His voice was small but clear. "Mr. Mayor," he said, "what if something like this happens again? The room fell silent. All the weight of all the days since that night pressing down on one small, simple question. Malcolm walked over to him, crouched down so they were eye level, and said, "Then we deal with it. Loud. Clear. Together. That's the only way we make sure it doesn't get hidden again." A slow ripple of clapping started. No cheering. No celebration. Just something steady, something real. In the weeks that followed, Willow Creek didn't become perfect. Old habits didn't die overnight. Some officers quit. Some residents refused to forgive. Some stories stayed painful no matter how many policies were rewritten. But a shift had happened, and everyone could feel it. A shift you only notice when you look back and realize the ground you're standing on is just a little more solid than it used to be. At Malcolm's father's house, now quieter than it once was, Malcolm sat out back one evening watching the sunset bleed into the horizon. His father, Nathaniel Price, leaned over and said in his slow, gravelly voice, "You took the hit, son. And you stood up taller. That's what real change looks like." Malcolm didn't smile. But he nodded once, deeply, because he understood now better than ever that real change wasn't fireworks or parades. It was work. Relentless, unglamorous, unshakable work. And it had only just begun. In the end, Willow Creek didn't heal because of one moment. It healed because enough people chose to stay in the hard moments, to keep showing up even when the headlines moved on, even when it would have been easier to forget. And if there's a lesson buried in all of it, it's this: you don't always get to choose when the ground shifts beneath you, but you do get to choose how you stand. And sometimes standing means staying, listening, pushing forward when silence would be simpler. Willow Creek had learned that the hard way. But they had learned. And they were still learning. Together. Sometimes, the most powerful moments in life are not the loudest. They are the quiet decisions we make when nobody is clapping, when the cameras turn away, and when standing up feels harder than staying silent. In Willow Creek, what began as a single moment of injustice became a mirror for an entire town to see itself honestly, maybe for the first time in a long time. It showed that real change does not come from a single headline or a viral video. Real change happens when ordinary people, neighbors and leaders alike, choose to stay at the table when conversations get uncomfortable. It happens when truth is more important than pride, and when accountability outweighs convenience. The story of Malcolm Price reminds us that leadership is not about titles or ceremonies. It's about how you carry yourself in the hardest moments. It's about choosing calm when you are justified in anger, choosing action when fear whispers to wait, and choosing truth when silence would be easier. Willow Creek's healing didn't start because someone demanded revenge. It started because someone demanded better, patiently, firmly, and without letting bitterness lead the way. To every listener, the lesson here is simple but not easy. You may not get to choose when you are tested, but you do get to choose how you respond. Whether in a small town or a big city, whether in public or private, your voice matters. Your willingness to show up matters. And sometimes, your quiet courage can be the spark that changes everything for the better. When faced with injustice, don't let cynicism convince you that your efforts are wasted. Don't let anger burn away your hope. Remember that real change is slow, deliberate, and often built one difficult conversation, one honest action, at a time. On behalf of all of us at U.S. Instructive Stories, I want to thank you for taking the time to reflect with us today. Stories like this are not always easy to hear, but they are necessary. They remind us of the work still ahead, but also of the power we each carry to make our communities stronger, fairer, and more compassionate. If this story moved you, challenged you, or made you think about your own role in building a better world, we invite you to stay connected with us. We have more stories to share, real stories, hard stories, but always honest stories. Thank you for listening, for caring, and most of all, for believing that together, we can stand taller and walk forward with purpose.